for the first time, August Wilson, who was in his 10-play cycle really reflecting the African-American experience back to his own community as well as the white one, you've mounted his, in my view, greatest play and hardest play with a white director for a subscriber audience. And I suppose what I want to ask you is, first of all, was that a hard decision to make, to do in Lincoln Center?
It wasn't a hard decision because the play was so wonderful. You know, I mean, I read it and loved it. A very dear friend of mine suggested it, and I thought it was just a great play. I hadn't seen it. I've seen most of August Wilson's plays, but I'd never seen Joe Turner's Come and Gone.
Yeah,
I thought I had.
I looked it up, and it's 21 years since it opened on Broadway.
So the decision to do it was easy because it's so damn good. I realized, though, that the decision to do it with Bart Shear, who's our resident director, I was looking for a play for him to do. And besides thinking, ooh, this is a really wonderful play, I also thought this is a wonderful play for this particular director. But I realized that, you know, we had certain obstacles to overcome, one of which was, would the estate of August Wilson, would his wife give us the rights? No white director had ever directed an August Wilson play, at least in New York City. Would the black artistic community, directors and actors, you know, be in some way offended by this? I was obviously deeply concerned about it, but I also felt that Bart's particular blend of skills, his rigorous attention to text and to sort of acting through lines, his visual sense, and his interest in taking plays out of a completely restricted and naturalistic setting. All of these things were things that I felt we could really give a wonderful production.
Well, I think, I mean, we're sort of trying to feel our way towards a new way of being and existing in the world after a catastrophe. And so that in a certain way, although it's about a completely other issue, the audience is somehow in the same, or do you feel that the audience is in the same sort of area?
I feel the audience is in the same area. I mean, I think also the recent election of Obama has a lot to do with it. I mean, Bart Shear, the director, has always said he feels that the end of Joe Turner, I mean, this is a metaphor, not a literal thing that he's saying, but the very end of Joe Turner, when Joe Turner can stand up proud and goes off down the road to find his place in the world, Bart has always said he feels that has set up this country for electing a black president. He feels that this was one chapter, and we're now starting a new chapter.
In the gestation of the play, were there areas of the play where it was hard to sort of find your way through it? Or was there any area of the play, or was it since it's now been set in the text is there? Was it hard for?
It was. I think Bart had a lot of homework to do, and he talked to a lot of people and listened to a lot of people, including the actors. I mean, I think, you know, it was a situation where, to some degree, the shoe was on the other foot, and he was. I mean, he wouldn't say this, but I can say it. He was somewhat isolated in rehearsal in the sense that he was one of the few lone white people in the room.
Right.
A room with black stage manager, a black company, with one exception, and he had to find his way through the emotions and the politics and the lore of the tradition that all those actors bring to August Wilson, particularly the older ones. The newer ones, not so much. Sticking to what he felt was right for the play, but being observant and careful to include all of this cast in terms of what they felt, you know, what black people at that time would do.
Was there a division at
No.
all? Was there disagreement?
No.
I'm not talking about gossip out of school here, but was there a sort of an aesthetic disagreement?
No, I don't think so. I think that the actors, you know, I remember the first day of rehearsal, Constanza Romero, who's August Wilson's widow, came and talked and talked beautifully and said to the company and all of us, the staff, you know, this was his favorite play, and it was a big deal that we were doing it. And then we showed the set, which is not typically certainly what people had seen 20 years ago,
No.
which was a very naturalistic dining room, kitchen area of a boarding house. This has elements of that come in.
It's more allegorical.
It's more
magical.
allegorical,
Yeah.
and I think at first some of the old timers in the cast said, "Whoa, what's that? But Constanza was very clear that the table and all that, the life around the table, be this kind of sanctuary place. But in terms of everything else around it, she was totally fine about the doors moving and the windows moving, because Bart was very determined to sort of have the road, the leaving and the coming in. I think also Bart discovered, as you do when you're working on a play, even if the author is no longer there, all of these reasons. I mean, if you look at the play initially, you think, well, is it a little too long? Are there scenes that repeat certain things? I mean, you think about all those kind of standard drama 101 questions, but of course as you work on it, you realize that everything is there for a reason. I mean, there was this scene that Bart and I kept talking about. It's halfway through Act 1 where, not to go on about it if people haven't seen it, but where the owner of the boarding house and his wife talk about Martha Pentecost, who was Loomis's wife, and she was in this room, and this other character whom we don't know, who wasn't in the play at all, was in that room, and the one who was in that room, and they spent about 10 minutes discussing Bynum, another character. Was he in the room next to her, or wasn't he there when she came to the boarding house, and so was there? And you think, well, why are we hearing about all of this? And of course what you ultimately discover through it is that it sets up why Martha Pentecost came to that boarding house initially, looking for this magic man, this bones man named Bynum. Right. And all of this stuff about whose room was who and when was she there sets her up. And if you didn't have that, right, she'd just appear.
That's right.
But I think Bart only came to that conclusion about 3 weeks into rehearsal.
One of the things that's always great about going to, August has a theater named after him on Broadway, and he insisted almost for his entire oeuvre be done on Broadway. But about 3% of African Americans come to Broadway, and yet when I sat and I said hello to you at the theater the other night, about 50% of the people in that theater were African American.
We've had a large African American audience since the first preview. I had this really revelatory conversation one day about 6 or 7 weeks ago with Woody King, who's an eminent figure in the black theater community and New Federal Theater and everything. And he came to see me about various things, including Joe Turner. And he said, "Andre, you don't seem to realize that there's this huge black audience, this huge middle-class black audience for you, for this play and other plays. You just have to find it." And he said, it's completely different than it was 20 years ago when he was running his theater. He said, this audience doesn't want to come to the New Federal Theater and see modest little productions in a tiny little house. He said, they want to come to Broadway. They want to come to Lincoln Center. You just have to open your eyes and figure that out.
Good point.
And so I was just imbued by this because I was terribly nervous about finding a good mixed audience. Could we do it? Well, we did it, partly because it's August Wilson, who's an icon now, sure, and taught in all the schools.
The theater at the moment, because of the recession, is facing a lot of interesting challenges. It seems to me quite clear that the sustaining of the theater, of the legitimate theater, is going to fall increasingly, it seems to me, more to the repertory theaters that have a subscription audience and have the wherewithal to create a sort of discourse with a serious discourse with the public that isn't to do with just escape. And how do you see it going? How are you planning for the next few years?
Well, I'm trying not to think about any of the negatives. The only negatives there are is the economics. And, even Lincoln Center Theater is affected by this. Our fundraising is down because people have less money. Everything is way down, not our attendance. There is fear that our funding just for next season, we're projecting $3 million less than what we were funded at this year.
But you have a big hit.
We have a big hit, and South Pacific, which has gotten us through this year.
Right.
So my attitude is, and I believe the board's, is we can't pretend we're not living in a slightly scary time, but to keep on going.
Sure.
And to not, when we in the theater, you in your world, me in my world, some actor in his or her world, you have to keep this kind of, to use a phrase of Kenneth Tynan's, cork-like buoyancy about our jobs, or you'll kill yourself.
No, absolutely.
And the other thing, and this is a point, is that there are a lot of business people on these boards. We have many wonderful ones on our board. What they're going through is terrifying to them, because their world seems to be dissolving for many of them for the first time.
Right.
After 20 years of unbelievable success and accumulation of wealth. And they spread that panic a little bit, and I understand this totally, around them, including to these institutions like Lincoln Center Theater. And they forget that we've been through this, perhaps not as bad as it is now, but ever since I crawled into this tiny little Playwrights Horizons as a volunteer in 1975, the need for money, oh my God, are we going to get through the year?
Yeah, it's a bit like being a freelancer.
Yeah.
We are living hand to mouth.
We're used to this.
Yeah, right.
We're used to not having enough
right.
ever. So it's less scary to us.
Sure.
Because we've survived, and we will continue to. So I kind of feel optimistic.